My guest today is a retired professor emeritus of psychology from the University of Oregon and a former Harvard University professor. A magician since the age of 7, he's coupled his knowledge of mentalism with his vast psychological research to become one of the world's most prominent skeptics of the paranormal. He's worked with the U.S. National Research Council and the Department of Defense, investigating psychics during the Cold War to see if psychic powers actually existed. He's a legend in the field of scientific skepticism, publishing his first critique of parapsychological research over 60 years ago. Since then, he's given countless Skeptics Toolbox workshops, teaching skeptics how to be more effective at combating harmful pseudoscience. He's the author of 5 books, including The Elusive Quarry, a scientific appraisal of psychical research. He's a co-founder of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, and he's a champion at uncovering how the world actually works. Without any further ado, I give you Dr. Ray Hyman.
I'm Ray Hyman, and you are watching Holy Koolaid.
It's the mid-1970s, the middle of the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union are in an arms race to end all arms races. Desperate for an edge, both sides are experimenting with advanced warfare tactics, including psychic warfare, to see if there's anything to the phenomenon. Center stage is the Stanford Research Institute, where my guest today was called to investigate claims of the paranormal, particularly with one alleged psychic, Uri Geller. Now, take me back to that first phone call you received from the Department of Defense. What was going through your mind as they started making their proposition?
It was December 1972, and I was grading exams at the University of Oregon, where I was a professor of psychology. And I got this phone call from Colonel Austin Kibler. He was the acting head of what's now called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, a group that had been set up within the Defense Department by President John Kennedy to deal with futuristic things that would have military implications. It's sort of the Flash Gordon type stuff. Colonel Kibler called me to ask me to drop whatever I was doing if I could and go immediately to the Stanford Research Institute, which, by the way, wasn't connected with Stanford University. It was just independent, to look at a psychic, a claimed psychic. He immediately said, "I know what you're thinking, Ray," because he knows I'm a skeptic, but this guy does all the things ordinary psychics are supposed to do, but he does things even more. He can apparently bend metal with his mind. And he gave me one example to tease me a little bit, I think, because he knew I was very reluctant. It wasn't clear whether he actually was there himself physically to watch this, but he said Geller was in a room with a bunch of real scientists. You know, I'm a psychologist, so I guess he didn't think psychology is a real science, but anyway.
the physicists.
Physicists, right.
They know how to measure things with laser beams and scales,
exactly.
But they don't necessarily know how the mind works.
But anyways, he was in a room with a bunch of physicists from Stanford Research Institute, and there was a table in the middle of the room. Geller said, "Does anyone have a ring?" He borrowed a ring. He said, "Don't let me touch it." Someone placed the ring in the middle of the table, on the top of the table, in the middle. Then he had everyone step back from the table. No one get to touch it, stand near it. He concentrated. The ring mysteriously stood on end. Well, not on end, but upright. Then it split and shaped itself into the letter S. Now, I am sure that wasn't a psychic thing, but it sounded to me like a good magic trick. I'm a magician. I thought, boy, I'd like to go down there and see it. So he got me to agree to go down there, and I did. And when I got there, just the team that was studying Geller consists mainly of 2 physicists, Russell Targ and Hal Puharich. And they each had good credentials in their fields. And they had been studying Geller for about a week by the time I got there, doing experiments with him to see whether he could bend metal with his mind, whether he could do any ESP even. And they claimed they had been getting results. They actually had made a movie to show some of their experiments with him and how they succeeded.
Did they have a movie of the ring standing on end, or was that just anecdotal?
No, the ring standing on end is an interesting case, because when I got there, that's what I was mostly interested in. But they showed me some of their data on the results they got with Geller on doing various things. And I was not quite interested in that as much as my mind was fixed on this ring thing. So I kept asking about the ring. Did you see it happen? Teach them. And some of the other people, I said, did you see it happen? Were you in the room when it happened? And eventually I figured out because I was asking everyone, that none of the people there had seen him. No one had seen it.
Oh, then where did this story come from?
Came from Geller.
Geller made up the story and that...
Well, Geller told them a lot of stories, and because they were so intrigued by other things Geller did, they just took it for granted that... But when they told it to me...
The story you heard was that the physicists saw it, but they...
And it turned out other stories, other things they attributed to Geller, it was but Geller told them that, but no one ever witnessed it. I couldn't find anyone who witnessed it.
But one of the things that you maintain is that scientists are some of the most gullible people in the world. Scientists who have been perhaps tricked by Uri Geller, as you say, believe him. The vast majority of the people who watched this program when Uri Geller was here believe him, want to believe him. Are you saying that he's a fraud and that they can't believe someone like that?
He's a fraud, but you can't blame people for believing him. Geller is more the product of a wonderful public relations campaign than he is the product of being a clever illusionist. What the public gets is only one side of the story. For example, I spent the whole day with him, and I know some other scientists who spent quite a bit of time with him who weren't impressed with him. He's been caught cheating several occasions.
Cheating how? What kind of cheating?
Oh, they've caught him switching envelopes. His girlfriend, Hannah Strang, has confessed to the Israeli weekly, Halom Hazeh, that she helped sitting in the audiences with him, coding him. She and her brother, Shippy Strang, was always with him, coding information to him for shows.
Coding information?
Sending signals to him about, one of the things he does on his show is he has people write on a blackboard. His back is to the blackboard, but he's facing the audience. They sit in the audience and code to him, signal him by hand signals, what was written on a blackboard.
The test that you did see Geller perform, was there anything
I didn't do it. I wasn't allowed to do any testing as such.
Okay.
I was part of a 3-man committee. One was George Lawrence. He was a psychologist, but he worked for the Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA. Then there was a parapsychologist from the University of Virginia Medical School, Robert Vandercastle. And then it was me. The kind of thinking that ARPA had, the way their minds worked, was that if there was anything to this guy, if he's for real, it's going to take a parapsychologist like Vandercastle to see it. On the other hand, if this guy was doing hanky-panky and stuff like that, it would take an expert on deception like myself to see it. So that was their idea. And it turned out at the end of the day, we spent the whole day as a committee watching Geller do a lot of demonstrations. They wouldn't let us actually test them, but they let Geller demonstrate a lot of things for us. He demonstrated apparent mind reading. He demonstrated bending tweezers of George Lawrence. He apparently made hands of a clock move mysteriously to another time. Hands of a watch, actually, in this case. And he went in a room with Vandercastle, and they were isolated in the room, and he apparently figured out and got correctly, was able to draw an image that Vandercastle had put in an envelope and kept in his pocket. And when he was alone with Vandercastle in the room, Geller was able to apparently divine that.
But you knew how he was doing all of it?
He has a variety of ways. When he apparently turns away, sometimes he covers his eyes like this. When you're drawing, he's very good. He just needs a quick glance. But he uses arm movement and pencil reading. He's excellent at it.
What's that?
If he gives you a pad, in fact, the reason he wants you to draw it large because your arm movement's even bigger. When I was at Stanford Research Institute, I sat beside him. And when all these tests, whenever I was able to read someone's arm movement and know what they had put on the pad, he was able to do it. When I wasn't able to do it, he wasn't able to get it either.
You have a background in magic as a magician, correct?
Yeah, most magicians want to say that is what is necessary. If you're studying a psychic, some claiming some psychical powers, you need a magician on hand to avoid trickery. That makes a little bit of sense, except that I, as a magician, and also as a psychologist, know of many cases where even magicians would take it in. And in fact, when Geller became more famous after this, the time I was looking at him, no one knew about him at the moment. Nothing had gotten out to the rest of the country. But within a few days almost of my visit to the Stanford Research Institute and what I had to report on, what I saw, Geller became quite famous all over the country. There was a story in February of 1973, I think it was. That was soon after I had been with him, called The Magician in a Think Tank in Time magazine. And it was a negative story. In other words, they took my word for it, and they decided to play it up that this phony psychic was fooling these scientists at Stanford Research Institute. That was Geller's first publicity, and apparently made him a household figure, very famous all over the country. Got on TV shows.
So there's no such thing as bad press.
Exactly. And he took off from there, and for the next 5 years or so, he was really in the limelight. A lot of things he did, got all kinds involved, all kinds of celebrities, and he went on various television shows, and he took off from there. After I had seen him at the Stanford Research Institute, I wrote a report on what I had witnessed and my interpretation of it. Actually, a 13-page, single-space type letter. And usually these reports, you can't make them public when you're part of a government committee, you've been invited to investigate something. So I didn't mean to make it public, but Martin Gardner was a very good friend of mine. Everything I did, all my investigations I would share with him. And he was very helpful to me, and we would sometimes discuss it. So I sent a copy of my 13-page report as a letter to Martin Gardner. It so happened Martin Gardner at that time, this 1972, and in 1972, almost no one in their private homes had a photocopy machine. But Martin Gardner, who was a freelance writer and famous for his column in Scientific American, probably one of the first people had in his own home had a photocopy machine. I had sent this letter to Martin, and Professor Percy Diaconis, who was then a very young magician and a friend of Martin Gardner's, was visiting Martin Gardner when he got my letter. And Martin showed him my letter, and Percy, without Martin knowing it, photocopied my letter and sent it around to various people. And pretty soon, within a few days, that really got spread like wildfire. The physicists at Stanford Research got a copy of it, and the president of the Stanford Research Institute, his name was Charles Anderson, sent me a letter threatening to sue me, saying that, Stanford Research Institute depends on its reputation for its multi-million-dollar research every year that gets from government agencies and stuff like that. This could affect us in terms of millions of dollars. Because one quote that Time magazine picked up on was I happened to say that I never saw such sloppy research in my whole life. Like that. And he saw that as a could affect the reputation of the Stanford Research Institute and could cost them millions of dollars. And he was threatening to sue me. He said, "This is really what you said," what Time magazine quoted from my letter. "This is what you really said. I want to know why you said it and what justification you had for it." So I did. I told him exactly what I had saw and what I had to say, why I said it. And, maybe it's fortunate he didn't try to sue me, but he did write back to me and say, "Well, thank you for your response. I know you're not going to be convinced by anything, but we're going to continue the research with Uri Geller. And when we show that he's for real, we'll let you in on it."
And that was shortly before he got debunked on Johnny Carson.
Well, he wasn't debunked on Johnny Carson. You got to be careful here.
Well,
he never was debunked as such. People tried to explain what he did, and some of the debunking was unfortunate. From the beginning, Mildred Christopher, a well-known magician, actually was invited to the Stanford Research Institute to see some of their work with Geller. They thought, he was a well-respected magician, he could sell things. So Christopher did a bad mistake, but it's typical of magicians, and all kinds of other people. He really did not know how Geller was doing it. Geller was fooling him, bending the stuff like that, some of the things he did. But he said that, and he goes wrong, of course, he said that Geller has a radio transmitter hidden in one of his teeth, and that's how he could pick up on doing his ESP type of stuff on people. Is he picking up somehow? I don't know how he got that. But he was completely wrong. But it's typical of many magicians. They never want to admit that they've been fooled. And so they make up stuff. In this case, he said he had the radio transmitter. And Geller made hay with had a good time with that, because Geller immediately was going around every time he goes to interview somebody, he'd open his mouth and say, "Examine my teeth. Can you find any radio transmitters?"
Which just because he's not using that method doesn't mean he's not using another.
That's right. Yeah.
I've kept noticing this trend in the skeptic movement where oftentimes people who are the most skeptical of crazy supernatural or paranormal claims have a background in magic or mentalism. I've gotten this from talking with James Randi, Banachek, Matt Dillahunty, and others. And it's almost like when you understand how easy it is to be fooled and how to fool others, that you just naturally become more skeptical. And I noticed that you also had a background in magic. How did you get into that? You had a background as a palm reader, correct? And as a magician?
Yes, I was a palm reader for 6 years, professionally, doing making money at that. I tried to make money at it.
And then you shifted into psychology, just developing a fascination with...
No, I didn't shift into psychology. What happened was, before I knew science or anything else, I started when I was 16, and I retired from being a professional palm reader when I was 22, and that's when I became a major in psychology. When I began doing palm reading, I didn't believe in it. I was trying to do some extra things to make money. I did some mind reading type demonstrations like you see Banachek do here, because people pay me more money than doing a straight magic show, so I used to do mentalism. and I did readings, but my palm reading was also kind of a reading too, reading people. But I got to believe it because people responded. I told them all kinds of detailed things from reading the lines in the hand. Can't remember anyone saying that I was completely wrong in any way, but many times they would validate. I said, because palm reading, you picked that up apparently. I saw on the heart line of someone that at age 17, around that age, they had some problems with their head. And oftentimes people say, yeah, that's when I fell out of a tree and landed on my head, or stuff like that. And I did things like that, and oftentimes these hits would come out, so it affected me too. So I got to believe that something was there more than just my giving him generalities. And one day, when I was about 22 and just had begun college, a friend of mine, who's a famous mentalist at that time, Stanley Jacks, whenever he came to the Boston area, he'd like to come and see me do my palm reading if I was doing it. I was doing it at fairs and stuff like that. And usually I had a wooden frame with a curtain over it, kind of a makeshift booth. And my clients would come into the booth, and I would give them the reading. And you couldn't see them, but people standing near the booth could hear. So my friend Stanley Jacks, whenever he was in town and I happened to be doing readings, he would sit outside. He couldn't see, but he could hear what I was saying. And between clients, if there was a break, he and I would discuss some of my readings I just did. He was fascinated by this. And one day he said, Ray, wouldn't it be interesting if the next client came in and you told her everything wrong on the basis of palmistry? In other words,
the opposite. So if it's like a long lifeline, you tell her she'll have a short life.
That's the idea. That's the idea. But majority of farmers today do not think that the lifeline tells the length of your life, tells the quality of your life, not the length. Because many people have been very badly hurt because a palm reader told them that they don't have many more years to live. And they spent most of the rest of their life really worrying about this. So in this case, the lady came in, and by the way, I was very reluctant to do this, but he had to convince me. But I respected Stanley, so I decided, okay, I'll try it. Because I felt that it was unethical, perhaps, to do that, and I got to consider my client, and it's not ethical to give him a false reading, basically. But I finally was convinced. The next lady came in, and I read everything wrong. She had a headline that said that she was very logical and stuff like that, and I told her, you're very bad with rational thinking. You don't think rationally. You like to solve things by intuition and stuff like that. And Heartline said that she liked to show her emotions. I said, you like to hide your emotions. So that's what I did. Every indicator I just read the wrong way. And to my surprise, she thought it was the greatest reading she ever had. And so I tried this on the next client, and also the same thing happened. And by then I was getting the notion that maybe what's going on here has nothing to do with the lines in the hand. And at that point, I decided to change my major. I was majoring in journalism to psychology. When I got into psychology, I learned a number of things quickly. First of all, I learned about scientific method and how you test things. I learned about how people can fool themselves to some extent. And I also learned how psychologists can fool themselves too, because they had the Rorschach test, the inkblot test, and stuff like that. I could tell, and I actually there was literature on it. Everything I could find in the literature showed that the Rorschach test does not work. It has no validity. Yet psychologists were, at that time, completely riveted. That was the major test. And every graduate student in psychology had to spend a whole year on learning how to use the projective tests like the Rorschach and a few others. Yet, when I went to literature, I could not find a single study which supported the reality of it. But I found a lot of studies where they didn't get any results. So I realized very quickly that psychologists were just as much taken in by false tests as I had been with palmistry. And I saw no difference in it. I saw that psychologists were like ordinary customers of clients of palmists. They were taken in by this as well.
So if we're trying to communicate good science to people, how can we be more effective communicators? It's so tempting to simply tell people that they're idiots or they're wrong, but that usually doesn't accomplish a whole lot outside of inflating our own egos.
Of course, this whole skeptic movement is trying to be like that, but unfortunately, you can't just tell people that you got to be careful or that you've been taken in, something like that. You got to understand them, and you got to come at it nicely, because it backfires a lot, because you're implying I'm smarter than you are. I know something that you don't know.
There is so much pseudoscience, fake news, and misinformation out there floating around.
Right.
What advice would you give to people listening who have a hard time determining fact from fiction? What can they do to better spot the difference?
Well, it's not simple in one sense, but read a Skeptical Inquirer. That would help. You'll get a lot of things like that. Whatever you're going to major in school and stuff like that, try and have courses that teach you something about statistical methods and about how you try to determine whether something is real or not, the various kinds of testing situations you would need to do it, double blind and things of this kind. And understand that when people are impressed by a reading they got, it turns out that this is the worst kind of evidence you could use for whether the reader who gave the reading is psychic or knows what he or she is talking about. It's called the fallacy of personal validation. There's been some good research on that. One of the things you got to realize is that the person himself who gets the reading and feels that this is real for them is the worst person to use to say whether it was actually true or not. Most readings succeed because the reader is telling the person things that are universally true of all people. The person getting the reading doesn't know that it's true of everyone else, but they know it's true of themselves, some of those things. And so they feel that this reading is uniquely true of themselves. And it's very hard for an individual to judge on the basis of how if they feel it applies to them. And you have to have someone else, some other way of doing it. It's got to be independent judges. It's a little complicated, but one way I have gone through this is I have used to give at these skeptic conferences, I started giving workshops on cold reading. I teach people, a whole room full of people, sometimes a few hundred people. I have them pair them up and I teach them how to scan each other, look at the hair, the face, the knees, the clothes, the shoes, and so anything like that. Make a quick scan, I call it, and just relax. And if you look at the person's hair and you say, what does it tell me about the person? Is he careless with his hair or what? Or is he trying to make an impression? If nothing stands out, forget about that. Look at the face now and see if there's anything, the shape of the face, or if there's any acne, scars, or anything else. If nothing stands out, forget about that. Look at the body.
Almost like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, exactly. But you're only looking for things that separate that person from others. And looking for things to stand out. You may find everything looks normal. You can't figure out anything special to say about the person except that the shoes don't match the rest of the clothes, okay? Or that the shoes are peculiar. Or that the hairstyle is unkempt a little bit, doesn't fit the particular situation they're in. And it turns out that this sounds abstract in some way, but when I tell people to do that, I pair them off. I tell them to do it to each other. And then I have them each give the other a reading based on just what they did in a quick scan. Most people never have done anything like this. They don't think they can. And then they give each other a reading. Right after the reading, I have everyone rank the accuracy of the reading they just got from their partner on a scale from 0 to 100. I started doing this in the early 1980s. I'd done several hundreds of these workshops where I teach people to do this. The average accuracy rating of the readings they give each other, most of them doing this for the first time, is 86% consistently. And I think any real reader who thinks they're psychic, they can get 86% accuracy. They would feel that's good.
After talking with Dr. Hyman, I discovered that the CIA documents on Project Stargate, the name of the psychic investigation research he was a part of, have been declassified and can be read online. I'll link to them in the description. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I had to wrap this interview up, but there were so many more questions I wanted to ask him. Why did the Department of Defense choose him? What were some of the flaws in the methodology of the scientists observing Geller? Did the general public have any idea that this kind of research was going on? And did most people believe in psychic phenomenon at the time? What led him to co-found PsyCop? And how has he seen the skeptic movement evolve in both positive and negative ways over the last half century? I did this interview at the Science and Skepticism Conference PsyCon last year, and fortunately, Dr. Hyman will be returning to PsyCon this year, October 16th to the 20th, along with Banachek, Dr. Gunter, Mark Edward, and Susan Gerbic, all of whom I've interviewed on this channel, plus Dr. Dawkins, John Delancey of Star Trek, Professor Brian Greene, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, and many other extremely fantastic speakers. PsyCon is one of my favorite conferences, so I'm sure as hell gonna be there, and I hope to see you there too. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, you can support my show by making a one-time donation on PayPal, or make an ongoing recurring donation on patreon.com/holykoolaid, where there's different perks depending on how much you pledge. And if you're already a current patron, thank you so much. You make all of this possible. You guys rock. And as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.